The year is 1806. Europe trembles once again under the shadow of a man who had already redrawn the map of the continent, Napoleon Bonaparte. 2 years after his masterpiece at Austerlitz, the Emperor of the French stands at the peak of his power. Yet, across the Rhine, a new enemy stirs, proud, defiant, and blind to the lessons of history. Prussia, humiliated by years of indecision and jealous of France's rise, marches toward war. In their arrogance, they believe they can stop Napoleon's empire. They could not have been more mistaken. The story of the 1806 campaign is one of speed, deception, and brilliance, where 2 battles fought on the same day shattered a kingdom and reshaped Europe forever. This is the tale of the Battle of Jena Auerstedt, Napoleon's double victory. In the autumn of 1806, the mood in Berlin was feverish. The Prussian army, proud of its Frederikian heritage, still clung to the memory of Frederick the Great. They believed themselves invincible, their discipline unmatched, their drill perfect. But time had moved on. Their tactics, their command, even their thinking belonged to a bygone age. While Napoleon had redefined warfare through mobility, corps organization, and initiative, the Prussians still marched in rigid lines, waiting for orders that came too late. Yet their king, Frederick William III, pushed by his wife Queen Louise and hawkish generals, declared war. Prussia demanded that French troops withdraw beyond the Rhine. Napoleon, amused and furious at once, replied with action. In a lightning stroke, the Grand Army crossed the Franconian forest, its 7 corps moving like clockwork, each capable of independent action, each guided by the genius of the emperor. The Prussian army expected a slow advance. Instead, Napoleon's troops moved with terrifying speed, covering 300 kilometers in just a few days. The French were hunting ghosts. They didn't know exactly where the main Prussian force was, but Napoleon's instincts were sharp. He realized his enemies were scattered, hesitating, and already on the defensive. The Prussian command was paralyzed by confusion. Old generals debated in endless councils, their maps spread out like relics of another age. Marshal Brunswick, the commander-in-chief, was cautious and uncertain. Prince Hohenlohe, his subordinate, was fiery but reckless. Between them stood the young and inexperienced King Frederick William, overwhelmed by responsibility. As the Prussian army stumbled westward, Napoleon struck like a thunderbolt. By mid-October, he realized he had outflanked the enemy. His army was not where the Prussians expected. The French were to their rear, cutting them off from their line of retreat to the north. "They are mine," Napoleon whispered, as scouts confirmed the blunder. On the morning of October 14th, 1806, 2 separate battles erupted, one near the town of Jena, the other near Auerstedt. Napoleon, commanding at Jena, believed he faced the main Prussian army. In reality, it was only half of it. Meanwhile, Marshal Davout, with barely 26,000 men, would unexpectedly face the main Prussian force of over 60,000 at Auerstedt. The fog of war was thick, both literally and figuratively. At dawn, a dense mist covered the hills around Jena. Napoleon rode out, his silhouette faintly visible through the haze. As the mist began to lift, he saw the Prussian lines stretched along the heights, turning to Marshal Soult, Issa, calmly before evening. "This army will be annihilated." The emperor ordered his artillery forward, and the thunder of French guns shattered the silence of the morning. The battle began. At Jena, the Prussians fought bravely, but mechanically. Their rigid formations crumbled against the flexible French tactics. French columns surged up the slopes, pushing through smoke and fire. Marshal Lannes attacked fiercely on the left, while Ney's corps arrived dramatically in the center, charging before orders even reached him. Napoleon, quick to seize opportunity, turned Ney's reckless advance into a coordinated assault. "Press on. Break them!" he shouted as the French infantry surged forward. Drums rolled, flags snapped in the wind, and cries of "Vive l'Empereur" echoed across the valley. The Prussian line wavered. Officers shouted commands that were lost in the chaos. French cavalry, led by Marat, charged with ferocity. Sabers flashing, horses pounding the ground like thunder. The Prussian resistance began to collapse. By noon, Their line was in disarray. Napoleon sensed victory and ordered a general assault. The Imperial Guard moved forward, a wall of steel and discipline. The Prussians broke. What began as a battle turned into a rout. As the sun pierced the clouds, Napoleon looked across the battlefield, filled with smoke, fire, and fleeing soldiers. At last, he murmured, "The sun of Austerlitz shines once again." Yet even as Napoleon triumphed at Jena, an even greater drama was unfolding just miles away. At Auerstedt, Marshal Davout, commanding just one corps, encountered the full weight of the main Prussian army under the Duke of Brunswick and King Frederick William. Outnumbered more than 2-1, Davout stood firm. His men, veterans of earlier campaigns, held the line with iron discipline. The morning fog obscured the enemy's movements. When the Prussians emerged, their columns stretched endlessly. Davout realized he was facing the main army, and retreat was impossible. He ordered his men to form up and prepare to fight for their lives. The Prussian attack began with artillery barrages and massed infantry. But their command was slow, their coordination poor. Davout's corps, compact and cohesive, responded with deadly precision. French guns roared back, their volleys tearing through the enemy's ranks. When the Duke of Brunswick rode forward to rally his men, a cannonball struck him down. Leaderless and stunned, the Prussians faltered. Davout seized the moment. He counterattacked, his infantry advancing with bayonets gleaming. The French cavalry charged the flanks, scattering the enemy's reserves. Despite exhaustion and mounting casualties, Davout refused to yield. His officers, grim and bloodied, fought like men possessed. By afternoon, the impossible had happened. Davout's 26,000 men had defeated an army more than twice their size. When word reached Napoleon that Davout had crushed the main Prussian force, he could hardly believe it. "That man is a marshal worthy of commanding under me," he declared. The battles of Jena and Auerstedt were not just victories, they were annihilation. The Prussian army ceased to exist as an effective fighting force. Entire regiments surrendered. Town after town opened its gates to the advancing French. Within weeks, Napoleon's troops marched into Berlin. The proud Prussian monarchy, which once dominated Central Europe, lay shattered. In the capital, Napoleon reviewed the captured banners of the Prussian army and remarked coldly, "These people learned nothing from Frederick the Great." The fall of Prussia was more than a military defeat. It was a psychological collapse. The myth of invincibility built under Frederick had died on the fields of Jena and Auerstedt. Europe watched in awe and terror as Napoleon redrew the political order once again. From the ashes of Prussia's humiliation, he would soon create new states, the Confederation of the Rhine, a network of French client kingdoms stretching across Germany. But the victory also sowed the seeds of future resistance. Among the defeated officers and reformers in Prussia, a fire began to burn, one that would lead, years later, to revenge at Leipzig and Waterloo. For now, though, in the autumn of 1806, Napoleon stood unchallenged, his enemies crushed, his empire triumphant, his legend unstoppable. Yet beneath the glory, the shadows of hubris were growing. The same brilliance that led him to victory would one day lead him to overreach. But on that October day, as French eagles soared over Berlin, the Emperor of the French could believe, for a fleeting moment, that he was invincible. The 1806 campaign was more than just another war. It was a masterclass in speed, deception, and command. Napoleon had moved his army faster, fought harder, and struck smarter than anyone in Europe could imagine. His ability to mislead, encircle, and destroy his opponents in detail made the difference between victory and annihilation. Prussia, unprepared for modern warfare, never stood a chance. Ebenin defeated their officers. Amid grudging admiration, "The Emperor moves like a god of war," one survivor wrote. Before we knew where he was everywhere. The twin victories at Jena and Auerstedt reshaped Europe. They ended the old Prussian monarchy as dominance and forced the rest of the continent to adapt or perish. Austria reformed its army. Russia studied Napoleon's core system. Even Britain, watching from across the Channel, realized that the age of static warfare was over. The Napoleonic way, speed, initiative, and centralized control had changed the very nature of conflict. And yet, history is cruel. What Napoleon achieved in 1806 would one day be mirrored in his downfall. Just as he had destroyed Prussia through overconfidence and outdated strategy, so too would his own empire fall to the same sins: arrogance, exhaustion, and enemies united. But in that moment, none of it mattered. On the battlefield at Jena, as the last echoes of cannon fire faded, Napoleon surveyed the field. Smoke hung low, drifting over bodies and broken standards. The emperor removed his hat and stood in silence. Around him, his marshals waited. Finally, he turned to them and said, "Gentlemen, this is not a victory. It is a lesson to all of Europe." Behind those words lay a truth only he could grasp. Empires rise and fall, but genius leaves its mark forever.